green. Good morning, everyone. May I encourage you all, please, just to take your seats, because we have an online contingent as well. It would be lovely if we could start on time for their benefit. Shall we begin? Welcome, everybody, to the Institute's Get Ahead Day. I think we have three very interesting topics to entertain and educate you with today. We're going to be talking about the technology in induction loops and the applicability or otherwise of Bluetooth type technologies. We're going to hear some updates around the British Standard 5839, the voice alarm standard, and what's happening with the new release of that we'll be having fairly soon. And then we're going to move on towards the end to some discussions on IP loudspeakers, their technology, how they're applicable, that type of thing. So it's quite a broad spectrum of things to get involved with. I imagine that everybody here knows something about one or more of those topics, but I doubt any of us knows everything about the three topics, so therefore there must be education for all. I'm not going to speak for very long. Thank you ever so much for everybody for coming, putting yourselves out to be here today. Thank you equally to everybody who's viewing this online. And in which case, as it now starts pretty much at 11:15, I'd like to hand the floor to our first speakers to begin the discussion on induction loops, Bluetooth technology and so on. Peter Rowe, would you please be ready to commence? Do we have the online contingent with us? We do? Amazing. Thank you. Peter.
Thank you. So I'm Peter Rowe, and I have the dubious pleasure of actually running the ISCVE training on induction loops. So that's where we'll start with the existing technology. And as we say, we're talking induction loops, hearing loops. They were called AFILs. There we go. So they've been around, induction loops have actually been around for quite a while. Any ideas when the first hearing aids were manufactured with telecoils? Does anybody know this? Any ideas? 60s? Any advance? 50s? 40s? 1938. Multitone introduced telecoils into their hearing aids in 1938, and initially it was there to pick up the magnetic field generated by the coil in the loudspeaker in the telephone handset, but since then we've used them for room loops, neck loops, counter loops, and so on. And brilliant technology. It's been used for, they can deliver amazing quality audio, and they've got quite a few really good characteristics which have actually been quite difficult to replicate with other technologies. So it's a beautifully elegant system, and if you're not familiar with it, then you're very welcome to come on one of our training courses. But essentially we've got a signal source, amplifier driver, antenna, which creates a magnetic field that the telecoil can then pick up. And to use it, all the user has to do is to turn up, switch the hearing aid to T, and they can join the party. So it's really easy. Even older people can do that without any trouble. And millions of people, hearing aid users, have enjoyed them over the years. Real people like like Ted, Andrew probably, Ted is unusual, okay? He's had severe hearing loss since he was very young, but normally, the reason why he's unusual is actually because he's very, very outspoken, and that's how we've come to know him. Normally, people who have hearing loss become more introverted, more withdrawn. If a load of people start laughing, they're not going to say, oh, please, can you repeat the joke and explain it, because I didn't hear. No, they tend to keep quiet. So hearing loss can contribute to depression, and it can also accelerate the onset of dementia, so it's not good. Now, somebody else who comes to mind, actually, Gordon Morris. Does anybody remember when we used to have these meetings in Watford? I think some of us do. Some of you may have been at the seminar that I referred to. Now, Gordon started off by saying, if you were forced to choose between losing your eyesight or losing your hearing, which would you decide? And he said, okay, so I know what you've chosen, I know what you decided, but now let's think about it. And he went on to describe just how miserable life actually is if you can't hear anything in the modern world. And also, it's just worth us understanding too, from our point of view, that no amount of technology that we can give these guys is actually going to bring their hearing back up to what we would consider normal. So being hard of hearing is actually very hard work for them, very tiring, and they need all the help that we can give them. Now, just before I leave Ted, he's not sitting in his favourite seat. In a typical meeting room, he will make straight for the back, and he will sit with his back towards the windows. Any ideas why that is? Well, it's actually, the way he would explain it is that if I'm looking at Ted over there, he's in silhouette and his face is in shadow, whereas he looks at me and the natural light can fall on my face and he can lip read me. Now remember, these guys need all the help that they can get. And so lip reading is crucial. Now, if we're providing a system either in real time or because we've got visual and auditory cues, we've got a screen, got Sky News or whatever it is, if the lip sync goes out by more than 30 or 40 milliseconds, they lose their ability to lip read massively. It drops off very quickly. So just beware any system that might introduce latency. So I'll just say how we got to know Ted. He knows that hearing loops can really help him, but he also knows that the Equality Act places a responsibility on service providers and employers to provide for disabled users, and that includes hard of hearing, and if they don't, he'll take them to court. So that's how we ended up surveying over 300 locations for a council, and yeah, it was actually quite boring, but I didn't do them all by myself. I have got some friends. But tragically, what we discovered, there was over 100 loops that we tested here, and only 20% of them worked properly. And that was really disappointing to know. It was a figure that we'd heard in the industry, but I didn't want to believe it, but we now had the evidence. And not only did it actually come up to the requirements of 60118, but also Ted would walk in the room and he would try the telecoil and he'd say, nah, I'll just use my hearing aid as it is. So why is it? What is going on? Okay, well, why do we need assistive listening systems in the first place? Is it because hearing aids don't work? Ooh, don't go there. He spent a fortune on his hearing aids and they have transformed his life, and they work beautifully most of the time. It's just that there's some situations, particularly when there's high background noise or low intelligibility, that they struggle. Now, we came across a young man once who was thrilled to have his hearing aids fitted. He said, I went to a party and I heard absolutely nothing. I got my hearing aids fitted. Yay, I can go to the party. But the problem was he heard absolutely everything. And he said, I don't know which is better or which is worse. So with an assistive listening system at any, whether it's induction loop or any, I would suggest that the only reason for having it is to get a better microphone closer to the source of the sound and cut out the background noise. And if you can't do that, then forget it. So in many cases, so if we just look at the our sound sources here. In many cases, we'll already have a sound source. It'll come from a TV studio or radio or film or something, and those guys will have used some nice expensive microphones with big diaphragms. Well, use that, bring the signal straight through to the hearing aid, and happy days, you're made. Sometimes we'll have a sound system like a church or something, and usually you should be okay with that. But on occasions, we have to provide our own microphone dedicated for the loop system or assistive listening, in which case we know microphones, that's not a problem, but where do we put them? And this is, I think, a very important question. Simple graph. There's actually a better version of this on the website that Tony and Ben have produced. But very quickly, we've got vertical axis with sound pressure level. I think most of us know this. Sound source on the left-hand side. As we move further right, the sound pressure decreases. And after a certain distance, what will happen is that the sound will bounce off the. Well, that's what the inverse square law. The dotted line is what we'll hear in free space. Okay, so it will decay or diminish according to the inverse square law. But if in a real room, the sound that's going to bounce off the walls, the ceiling, the floor, and so on will come back to meet us and produce a reverberant sound level. And what we're showing here, that there's a point where the direct sound and the reverberant sound are equal, and that's what is called the critical distance. If we plug some numbers into that formula, we get a figure, a real-life figure of less than a meter, and it's invariably a lot less than a meter. So remember, these guys need all the help we can give them. So we want to give them more direct sound than reverberant sound, so our microphone needs to be nearer than the critical distance. And in reality, that reverberant sound level is the result of reflections due to our wanted sound. There's likely to be other sounds. There'll be aircon, road noise, other background noise. That means that general noise floor is high, which means that the microphone needs to be close. Now, we understand that. That's not difficult for us. We do it all the time. Take a everyday example. Prime Minister resigns. We're used to that. We know what the score is. There they are. They're stood behind that lectern. You've got journalists in front and the cameras, they can zoom in, they can see the tears, see the mascara running, all of that. But where's the microphone? And the microphone is right here. It's right here. And another example, I'm really glad to see that Doug is on the online at the moment, because Doug produced a lot of these materials that I use for the training. And I'm going to have to call Doug later, and I'm going to ring him up, and I'm going to say, hello, Doug, it's time we met up. And where's Doug going to want me to hold the telephone? Right here. It's not difficult. We know how to behave. So why is it then that we see systems installed for the very people that need as much help as they can get, and the microphones are on the wall, on the ceiling, over there, anywhere, but right here? Okay, so here we have a nice, expensive Audio-Technica boundary microphone, a complete waste of money. Nobody is going to want to use that hearing loop. They'll just switch off straight away. Okay, so this is quite an extreme example, I know, but it's not the worst, all right? It's not the worst. In reality, probably what you might find is that you get a room like this and there's a boundary mic on the ceiling. Now, I've got a microphone attached to me, so if I walk away from the lectern, it comes with me. But if I had a lectern microphone, the people online would say, come on, get back on mic, because it's hard enough staying away because it is, stay on mic. But if I was to take this off and put it over there on the ceiling, well, you get the point. We understand this is what we do. The problem is there's an awful lot of people out there who don't get it, and we're in the minority. So microphones, absolutely vital, and it doesn't matter what your bearer technology is, whether it's loops or whatever. We need to get that right. So moving on, not only do we need a signal source, we need to create a good, strong, uniform magnetic field. And for that, we need a current driver, an amplifier, and there's some great manufacturers out there, and they've got a fantastic range of products to choose from. However, who is doing the choosing? And quite often it comes down to electrical contractor or somebody like that, and they'll get the box and they'll say, oh yes, 400 square meters, oh yeah, that'll do. And they don't understand the impact of things like the shape of the loop, metal losses, spill requirements. They'll just get their amplifier, they'll connect it to a wire, and they will throw it across the ceiling. Now, this looks a bit like a hall of shame. Well, it is, but you wouldn't believe. Well, I can't believe how many times we've seen this sort of thing happen. Now, it's above a ceiling. It's above an aluminium T-bar drop-in ceiling that produces all manner of shorted turns that's going to completely ruin our magnetic field. Now, depending on the things, the anodizing or the powder coating or whatever it is, you may be lucky. You may get away with it. You might just put a stronger driver on, but people don't because they're restrained by cost. And the other thing is that this incredibly neat installation method, because this is the loop. This is the loop wire here. Okay, this is. It's not actually a perimeter loop anymore. It's probably dangling above the heads of the users. Now, if a loop wire is above or below the hearing aid, the telecoil is in the horizontal part of the field, which means it's in a null of the vertical and they won't be able to hear. Back to our lovely long room here. The loop antenna in this room is a single turn of wire around the dado level, okay? It's driven by a woefully, pitifully small amplifier that can't give enough signal. And if you measure the signal strength in the middle of that room, the magnetic field strength will be minus 20 dBl, okay? A lot of activities in that room happen with chairs around the edge. You can see one or two of them in the picture. People will sit around the edge and their head is almost touching the loop. Signal magnetic field strength there is plus 20 dBl. So a variation in that room of 40 dB, and the standard calls for plus or minus 3. So, well, how did we get to where we are? There's quite a number of reasons, really. But one thing that we see quite a lot of is drawings and specifications produced by mechanical electrical engineers. Building services often start on their desks, and they often produce drawings and specifications, and some are brilliant, and others, well, less so. And quite often what we find in reality is a specification might refer to standards and requirements and so on, but the drawings themselves, they will just illustratively draw a perimeter loop. So we've got some perimeter loops on these drawings. They'll draw a perimeter loop and there's nothing shown on the drawing to connect to them. And that's actually what we've seen in reality. We've been to several places where there's a perimeter loop and an amplifier, nothing connected to it. It's been signed off and paid for. And so there's something missing here. So what happens is the M&E guys will produce a document pack. The architect will put it together in a tender pack that goes to the main contractor, goes to the electrical contractor. They may or may not ring a company like us. But by the time it gets to the bottom of the food chain, they're not interested in the efficacy of the loop. They're going to be judged on their price. And so it's a race to the bottom. So something else to be mindful of and look at. The last link in the chain, which I hope we're going to touch on a little bit more, is that we have talked about the telecoil in the hearing aid. Well, it's all dependent on whether you've got one. And if you have got one, has it been enabled? We'll talk more about that in a bit. Just one real-life example. This is from the council that Ted introduced us to. That is a main switch, and we have 3 completely independent loop systems in this picture. It's a room with a divider down the middle, and you either have the red loop around the whole room, or you have 2 green ones, which of course have enormous spill issues between them, but that's not what I wanted to point out. It's this switch, okay? Every time I went in that room, that switch was in the wrong position. Now, why is that? Whose job is it to switch the switch? Well, it's the guys that set up the tables and chairs and open the partition. They make sure the heating's on, the lights work, the projector's on, the batteries in the remote, the HDMI lead and everything. And right at the bottom of the list, the one thing that they're going to always forget is some switch that kind of does nothing, and there's no consequence if it's in the wrong position. It gets forgotten. And what is the answer to an issue like that? Is it training? Well, good luck with that, because we've tried that so many times, and it hasn't worked. Or, as engineers, can we say, there's another way of doing this? So clearly, that's what we did. We put a sensor on the partition. We put phased array loops in the 2 rooms so they don't spill, and happy days. We all lived happily ever after. Nobody needs to touch it. It works by magic, or it did until the building flooded. So we now got to rebuild all these systems because they've had the mother of all floods in that building. So my time is up. loops are awesome, absolutely incredible. People like Ted make such a fuss about it because they work, they're really, really good when they work. But I think we as an industry have got some homework to do because this is not a new technology. And there's quite a number of things that are going wrong. There's certainly, it wasn't, our experience is not just based on this one council. We've looked at many where these figures are reflected. There are certain applications. Churches is one where you would expect a better, for various reasons, and we can talk about later why you'd expect a higher performance. But what is the answer? Is it more training? Because if so, we need to be training the people beyond the audience that we've got at the moment. Or as engineers, can we actually come up with some better solutions that are going to work more for the people that need us? And when we do, we need to be mindful of what the manufacturers are doing. And if we get it right, millions of people will thank us for it, and they're the people that need as much help as we can give them. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. Hope you can hear me. It's your water here, Peter. Maybe. Okay, skip on. So, my name's Russell Simpson. I'm here to talk to you today about Auracast as an assistive listening system. Now, Peter's done a very good job of showing us the benefits and pitfalls of a traditional loop system. Hopefully I can go on to colour that in a little bit more about what Auracast might mean in that regard. I'm Technical Director at Ampetronic, for those who don't know me. I've been developing products and services for them for over 25 years. Members of the various institutes and societies, and also working with the committees to develop standards that support our good work and hopefully give us something to reference and try and achieve for those people who do install it correctly and everybody else who doesn't. So, first of all, this is what I'm going to go through. Auracast is an assistive listening system. We've heard from Peter a little bit about what assistive listening system is and how good it can be, but I'll try and go and just recap some of those things, maybe what the key requirements are for an assistive listening system. What does the market look like now beyond loops? How do we get here? And then go through Bluetooth low energy, Auracast, what that means, how it's going to affect the landscape, and what the risks and challenges are. And then ultimately why we probably need a high level assistive listening standard to provide that reference point for whatever type of system's installed. So Peter's already filled us in a little bit about what an assistive listening system can be if it's installed properly. But that's not always the case. These things are applied in many ways. Ticket counters, banks, building societies, one-to-one scenarios, area coverage systems, there's sort of audio description and various other ways that they can be used. Even multilingual scenarios where we have multiple channels, which is fantastic. But the goal really is to provide the audio from the room, as Peter rightly says, from a very localized microphone source directly to the person in the room so they can hear and access that sound. Assistive listening systems themselves are essentially a form of accessibility, just like wheelchair access and all the rest of it. It should be provided so people can do it without any significant barriers. They should be able to just turn up, press a button, and join in. Obviously, loop systems have managed to achieve that for a long period of time, assuming they were installed correctly, and provide positive impacts. So where are we going to go with that? The key requirements of a loop system, we can list a bunch of things that are really important. Consistent provision, pretty much falls off the back of what Peter told us just now. We can have all the best aspirations in the world, but if we can't provide something that's consistent, then 20% is a terrible number to come across. The top few on this slide here, low latency, directly to hearing aid, low power costs for the hearing aid, simple connection method, voice bandwidth, all those things are satisfied by a loop system. as well as all the various other things underneath. So in other words, we have a solution that works. And in the main, there's no barrier to access, provided the signage and the maintenance is in place, and people have automated switches rather than a switch to remember to press. So there's many other things a system could do. We could provide other channels. We could do encryption for courtrooms and other applications and so on and so forth. But they're kind of getting away from the point of the accessibility. Whoever needs to be in that space needs to get to it easily, whether it's encrypted or otherwise. They need to be able to walk in at a counter or whatever. Maybe Andrew Thomas will talk a little bit more about challenges that people face in user experience a little bit later as well in the real world. What does the market look like now? Well, I've been at Ampetronic over 25 years developing a lot of loop systems, and when we first started out, it was all fairly simple. It was all just analog systems with the odd flip-flop and logic gate, all fairly straightforward. And then over the last 30, 25 years or whatever, things have moved on to lots and lots of different scenarios. We've got DEC systems, infrared systems, FN systems, Wi-Fi systems, a whole bunch of different user experiences, which, if I walk into a room today with a hearing aid on, what am I going to interact with? There's a random amount of solutions available, and most of them, as poor Peter's find out, don't necessarily work in some cases. So while loops and telecoils remain the best practice because they're direct to hearing aid, assuming the hearing aid loop coil is turned on, there's still some challenges with all the different solutions that we have in place. So as it stands, direct to hearing aid is the goal. Loops and telecoils are the lowest barrier to access. We've got receiver-based solutions, which very often, in order to access a hearing aid, have to go via a neck loop. They're quite common, I think, in the US. There's a lot of those scenarios. I think there's a lot of mandated. When you put a venue together for a certain number of people, it has to have X receivers provided. And they can provide it in different ways, infrared, FM, DECT, and so on and so forth, but it still requires somebody to ask for a receiver. There's still a barrier. And more recently, we've had technology. Now we've all got a processor in our pocket. We can bring our own device. We've got Wi-Fi solutions, which might be beneficial, but actually tend to provide a significant latency, which then causes a problem for those people who actually really need it. So it's not perfect. The goal really is to deliver something direct to hearing aids. So how will Auracast affect this? Well, it's the first technology that has the potential to deliver us all three. In theory, it should, as it's been driven hard by the hearing aid community, hearing aid manufacturers. It's likely to become well adopted over time. They're going to integrate it into their hearing aids, and that should happen. Obviously, we can provide receiver-based solutions. The same thing applies for those people who have legacy technology. They might be able to have a receiver with a neck loop. Unfortunately, there's got to be a transition period somewhere between loops, which are where we are at the moment, and a potential future solution. Bring your own device. In theory, Auracast will land in everyone's phone. I've got an iPhone 13. It doesn't do the latest version of Bluetooth, but iPhone 14 does version 5.3. Whether Apple are going to provide that in the near future to access directly to Auracast into their system remains to be seen, exactly what time that'll be launched. The same applies to Android and all the other sort of mobile phone operating systems. It will appear, but how it will interface remains a question. Also, the chances are when you do use that device, you're going to be passing it to your receiving devices. So it's not just a question of the silicon appearing in your phone. You need to have the silicon in your receiving device such that you can transmit from the source that you're receiving straight to the earbuds. What delays you're going to get and all that remains to be seen. There's a lot of things to work through to make sure that this is going to be the thing that ultimately can replace loops. So let's look at the technology a little bit, understand why BLE is different, what Auracast means. Well, look, Bluetooth, as we all know, 2.4 gigahertz, operates in the same band as Wi-Fi. It exists. It contains a hopping algorithm to kind of dodge the systems that are in place, or the stuff that's in the local environment. People absorb these frequencies. So when you fill a room, it'll be different with different levels of field that when you haven't got the room filled, but of course it depends on where you install the transmitter or the beacon. There's a bunch of question marks over Bluetooth higher levels that will be used in these systems. Auracast allows us access to higher classes of Bluetooth radio, and in those classes there's a bit of a minefield globally as to exactly what power levels are applicable. The USA, I think you can crank the thing up to 100 milliwatts. The rest of the world might be a little bit more restricted to 10 milliwatts. That limits the range a little bit, but ultimately a 30-meter space, line of sight usage should easily cover a room like this, no problem. However, when you do install a class of device that's above class 2 or 2.5 milliwatts, you need to control the output power. So even when we do install these things, we're still going to need to control the level of that signal. Otherwise, we'll have coexistence problems with all the other Wi-Fi channels and all the other channels that exist in that space. Essentially, if you turn a system on at full whack, you're going to compromise the range and functionality of the other systems in that space. So there's an installation consideration to make. The reason Bluetooth Auracast low energy is good is because it allows us to open a new feature, which is broadcast. Traditional Bluetooth, as you know, works with a connected link. We've all tried to pair to a device and enter a code or find out it doesn't connect or whatever and then have to reset it and start again. But Bluetooth Low Energy Auracast allows us to do broadcast, whereby we go back to a traditional radio sense. We have a transmitter and anybody in the space can just connect to that without having to have those acknowledgements, the typical kind of things you might find in a normal sort of network comms environment where there's a transmission and an acknowledgement. I've got the transmission and all this. None of that in the broadcast scenario. It means that it improves the power efficiency. The radios can be off when they're not ready to receive. Makes a lot of sense. So it utilizes that plus some new silicon to support all that, of course. And as time has gone on, various building blocks have been made to support what Auracast now is in 5.3. In 5.2, for example, they released a new audio codec, LC3, which is low complexity and allows some support for missed packets. Allows it to overcome problems that it might encounter in the real world when you turn and turn away from the beacon and whatnot, so practical scenarios. So there's some resilience built into it. It also improves the latency and presents a sort of a time to delivery to help us manage different scenarios where we're dealing with screens that might have delays and the like. And then finally, Auracast, as it's been launched in Bluetooth 5.3, it's classed as the standardized method for public broadcasting. So this is what we're going to get. This is where it's going to go. But there's a lot still to do on that. This has been introduced as a basic audio profile. It allows us to do a bunch of different things at different bit rates and bandwidths. But the hearing access profile underneath that mandates certain combinations of the above. So certain things, if they're going to be a hearing access solution, have to be certain combinations of that. Certain bandwidths, mono, stereo, whatever, I can't remember the full details, but those are the limited sets. If it wants to be a hearing access profile compatible, it has to meet certain requirements. Okay, the next slide basically just talks a little bit about accessing connection. The other side of this, we talked about multiple channels and things earlier and the possibility for encryptions and limited access. The ability with the new Bluetooth technology allows us to use a key to encrypt certain things, but how do you access that key? Is it on the back of a ticket? Is it from an NFC tag? If I use the NFC tag with my phone, does that then connect to my hearing aids? There's a whole bunch of scenarios that we've got to work through in practice, and I think that's pretty much where the industry is now with the Bluetooth SIG. They've got the solution. It exists. It works. Technically, it's going to be fantastic, but this is where people are just trying to work on now. The connectivity of it. How do these things coexist? When I connect to your system, is it going to work the same as mine? The standards and making it all hang together. Ultimately, the goal is, like a loop system, simply press to connect. But practically, how does that work when you go to a bank and there's 10 counters? Which system I connect to? How do I make that choice? So also, if there's an encrypted system, how do I reset, change those keys? And finally, one of the biggest challenges you might have when everyone's carrying around a Bluetooth transmitter in their pocket is how is somebody not just going to create a spoof system with some random inappropriate material playing in a train carriage for somebody to, masquerading as the announcements for the stations. How is all that managed? Those are the details that are still to be panned out. So we've got just a bit of a summary here. The beauty of Auracast is it's been developed for assistive listening systems, the hearing aid profile. It satisfies the large requirement of what works for loops. There's still some considerations for installation. We've got to worry about output powers. There should be a possibility that we can roam between beacons, provided those technical challenges are overcome in every receiving device. How does that receiving device choose when I move, if it's the same system from this end of the room to that end of the room? How does it know which one to listen to and how to move between the two? There's still some of those kind of things to work through. Ultimately, the challenges that remain is the various scenarios, the connection options, and obviously the security concerns we've got to nail down. So I think that's where the work is now. So whilst Auracast is announced, there's still some detail to work through. So just to recap, Auracast is the first technology agreed by the hearing aid industry. It will be adopted direct to hearing aid audio. It's possible that it could work like a telecoil, and it should be relatively low power consumption with all the various features that we've talked about. Broadcast, it can go one-to-many, so it works like everything else. And it ultimately satisfies all the things that we had in our key requirements list. So it's likely to see broad adoption if it goes well. In theory, all this should hang together, but it will take time. There are some challenges to overcome, as we've mentioned. And what does it mean, really, for the end users, installers, and venues? Well, we've already talked about mobile phones not necessarily supporting it just yet, but just on the edge of it with the new silicon. For the end users, we might not see hearing aids that actually are supported in this till next year. At what point, it remains to be seen. Depends on how the standards work through. We've got Auracast version 1. Essentially, we might be at version 1.1, 1.2 before actually this becomes something that people can work with. The connection simplicity we talked about, this isn't straightforward. If I'm going to have a device that I want to transmit to my ear, be it with a hearing aid or earbuds or whatever I get from whatever manufacturer, I've got to work out how to connect that in the various environments, and that's still to work through. But there's loads of benefits to come from it. Ultimately, we're relying on the quality of service by the venue to provide us with the scenario. There's no point having the ultimate goal to put something in that should satisfy if it's not delivered. Installer, currently there isn't really a product to install. Again, first products next year in theory, but then there'll be nobody to listen to them. So it's a bit of a tricky situation, a bit of a chicken and egg to unpick. And finally, we've got to, when we do those installations, we've got to take into account of the other things that might be in that environment. So that's all still to be managed and worked through. For the venue, again, there's no product to install. There's no, where are we? Smart devices, yeah. Again, it remains to be seen how all this stuff's going to pan out. So there's a lot to unpick. And open broadcasts aren't really for everyone. Some people aren't really going to fancy putting their audio system out. So there's a lot of stuff to consider, spoofing again. So why do we need a top-level standard? Well, we talked about, we're still going? Yeah. We talked about the need for that a little bit earlier. Some systems like Wi-Fi and various other systems haven't really got a reference point for an assistive listening. So these can be provided, but there isn't really a technology standard. If we can put a top-level assistive listening standard in place that says whatever you provide, whatever solution you use, you need to meet these key requirements. Whatever technology comes around next 10, 15 years, Wi-Fi, low energy or whatever we want to call it, appears, will be protected as a user. So with the increasing diversity we've seen for assistive listening technologies, there isn't really any top-level guidance. What's going to happen is, unless there's standards and a reference point, we're going to lead to degradation of performance for what people experience in the users. And we've got nothing really to reference internationally. The goal really we're trying to provide is consistent provision and no barriers. So anyone can walk into a space and use something that will deliver for them. And that's it. I'm afraid. I might have a question or two, but I don't know whether we're doing that now. Are we, Roz?
Do we take all the questions? We've got one more.
Okay, fine. We'll do them all at the end.
Then we can do sort of, then maybe we could do all,
Okay,
all the questions.
fantastic, no problem.
Hello, can you hear me? Thank you, well done. Hello, hello, hello. All good? Yes. Well, it's so nice to be here face to face with people after so long, for me personally. And Andrew, didn't see you better. Hi. This is myself, Andrew Thomas, the Market Development Director of Contactor. I'm not going to go through every line, don't worry. But basically, a couple of things I just want to point out there. I'm the chairman of the International Hearing Loop Manufacturers. That was an association that was started around about 2015-ish. Our good friend Doug Edworthy was the chairman for the first couple of years. I've subsequently picked up the reins. And that was put together really to be able to speak to the hearing aid manufacturers. So the hearing aid manufacturers who came along around about 2014 to a meeting, I believe, at Gatwick with Julian and myself attended, the MD of Ambitronic. It was kind of hosted by a charity called Hearing Link. And the hearing aid manufacturers were going to tell the loop manufacturers of this new technology that was going to come along called Bluetooth. They didn't call it Auracast then, it was just Bluetooth, a new Bluetooth that's going to change the world. And they weren't going to speak to the loop manufacturers unless they had a body. So that's why the loop manufacturer's body was formed very quickly. And we've subsequently started to build up a relationship with the hearing aid manufacturers. Interestingly, back in 2014, whenever it was, they were talking about this new technology coming along within a couple of years. Okay, so that's now 6-7 years ago, and we still haven't really seen anything, any product as such, out there. So although there's a lot of talk going on, that's still to happen. I'm also chairman of the International Hearing Access Committee. So this is a committee that's under the umbrella of IFO, the International Federation of the Hard of Hearing. And that was formed after the Berlin Loop Conference in 2017, really to talk about how internationally, and it included a representative from AHEMA, which is the hearing aid manufacturers, how as a committee, we could help to change some of the challenges around what Peter was talking about, some of the things that weren't working for assistive listening systems. So that was kind of a key little group that was put together, and we've put a statement out back in 2019 about how long we think telecalls will be in hearing aids. If you haven't seen it, I've actually got some copies of it, but that was talking about telecalls being around for the next 10 to 15 years. It was poo-pooed a little bit by the hearing aid manufacturers. Guess what? They're not poo-pooing it so much now. I'm also on the BS 559 committee, which writes the BS 8300 standard, which is about accessibility in the built environment. Okay? So my, if you like, speciality, I'm not overly technical, but I've worked a lot with people like Ted, people who want to access assistive listening, and I've tried to understand the challenges they face. So let me give you a little example. The place we're at today is, I'm really grateful that we've been able to use it. Hands up who noticed a loop sign on the counter as we came in. Yeah? So before this event started this morning, I went up to the young ladies at the counter and I said, I've seen you've got a loop sign there. They went, yeah? So I said, which counter has got the loop on it? And they looked at each other. And then I went, where's the loop? And then within a few minutes, they were on their knees looking at cupboards. I said, don't worry, don't worry. It turns out it was, they didn't find it, but it was a portable loop system. They couldn't find it. So I said, well, how do people actually know how to ask for the loop system? And they looked at each other, and they went, we should know, really, shouldn't we? So for me, that's just an example of where things fall down for the user. Okay? Now, I know that there are products out there, technically the portable loop might work. It might be charged up somewhere, living in a little home for it, and it works technically, but it doesn't work for the user. So going back to points that Russell and Peter have made, being able to access things quickly and easily is a very important part of the experience of someone with a hearing loss. So going back to the 559 committee, one of the things that the committee was told when they were updating the BS 8300 was that it's not the individual that's the disabling factor, it's the environment. Okay, so that's what we were told we had to think about when we're putting forward change or suggestions about the rewritten standard. It's about the environment being accessible, and it's not down to the individual to have to ask or have to do something to get access. Does that all kind of make sense? Yeah? And I sit as an observer on the Bluetooth audio. What's that ASP team, Russ? Audio, yeah, something like that. So, what are the current challenges? And a lot of this stuff Peter's raised. A couple of things I want to just highlight. A lack of understanding on the user's needs. You know, what do people actually need to access assistive listening? It's a key point. Distress purchases. So service providers. It was spoken about the service providers. What do they need to do to make themselves accessible? Well, a distress purchase is something that the kind of law says you must. It's not saying, well, if I buy this, I'm going to suddenly make loads of money. So by and large, people are going to pay the least amount of money they can to tick a box. And it's something that Peter raised about service providers, just, you know, when it comes down to the electrical contractor, and by the time it gets down to a certain level, it's done on price, which ultimately means that the only person that loses out is the person that wants to access the equipment. You know, the manufacturer's been paid, whoever specified it has been paid, everyone's got a benefit out of it, apart from the individual that's supposed to be getting a benefit. The industry's not policed. One thing I will say before I go any further, when loops work, they are amazing. They are amazing. And when Peter spoke about Ted, I know the guy personally. He has had some very good experiences using loop systems. In the US, for example, there's a significant group of people under the HLAA, the Hearing Loss Association of America banner, called Get in the Hearing Loop campaign, that are really spreading the word. You know, and that's done through advocacy. It's not done through the legislation saying you've got to do this, you've got to do that. There are people going out there that are really pushing loop systems. So there's more of there's more reason to get it right, because they will complain over in the States. Unlike here, if something's not quite right, we don't normally complain. Negative marketing. You know, Russ mentioned about other assistive listening systems. And again, I want to use the US as an example. There's a lot of negative campaigning against loop systems by other technologies, saying that it's old technology, it doesn't work. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of the things that are being introduced now don't work. You know, they don't. You have to have a device, or you have to be given a device. You have to go and ask for a device. So I suppose my point is, again, in whatever technology you're using, there is still a lot of attention that needs to be paid as to how people access equipment. maintenance. That's a big thing, Peter. I think that's come out of your work you did at that council. It's incredible that people think they can go and buy something and leave it in there for 5-10 years and expect it to still work, or it's still there. Guess what? It doesn't. So equipment needs to be maintained regularly. Staff need to be trained regularly. But there is progress that's been made. You know, going back to the first hearing aids that had telecoms back in 1938. I was paying attention. There's a lot of stuff that's gone on behind the scenes trying to get it right. I've mentioned the standards already. Russell's also mentioned that. Advocacy, particularly in the US. There was a period of time, probably around about 2010, 2011, I did a lot of work with some charities, with Hearing Link, with the RNID, and we tried to set up with Hearing Link a kind of a national campaign, which was headed Let's Loop Swindon, Let's Loop Eastbourne, Let's Loop Newcastle, and I ended up kind of going all over the place trying to set these groups up, and it was fascinating for me to understand what the needs were of these people trying to access equipment. I remember a couple of experiences where in Eastbourne, where Hearing Link at the time had their head office, they invited the disability champion for Southern Rail into this particular meeting, and we went down to Eastbourne Station, and she was very, very keen to show me this new loop that had been installed. The loop was actually in a little box stuck on the wall with a sign on it. So, but she didn't know that. She came in and said, "There's the loop sign." I said, "Well, where does it cover?" She went, "The whole concourse." Well, actually, the loop was in the unit itself, and it was in a metal box, and it didn't work. So when the people with the hearing aid wearers that came along all kind of came in and went, "Oh, look, there's a loop over there," they didn't realise that I had to kind of get their head right next to it for it to operate. So there's a real lack of education, I think, in certain areas, and that's something we need to work really hard on. When people do have a good experience, you know, again, the US is a good example. They're sharing that, for example, on Google Maps now. So Google Maps have allowed, in the US, the people to put on their venue that's got a loop system. So people like Juliet Sturkins, who's an advocate for loop systems in the States, has kind of exploded Google Maps with loads of loop venues in, I think she lives in a place called Oshkosh in, I'm not sure which state it is now, but you know, there's kind of 800, 900 venues in this city. And people are starting to do that across the US, where these hotspots of advocacy are. The maps are starting to be populated, so it's really good, and that can be a global experience for anyone that's got loop systems installed. Just going back to the ease of use, people don't want to go into somewhere and then have to fiddle about with a phone or go and ask for something. They should be able to come in, press a button, go around their business, and then go about their daily lives. Discretion. There's still quite a stigma about people with hearing loss. Still a big stigma, and I think there are some not guidelines. There's been some reports from some of the charities about the age men get their hearing tested, and I know men of a certain age. If I had to go and wear a hearing aid, does it mean to me that I'm disabled, or is it I'm giving into old age? And it's probably the fact I'm vain, that I would resist having my hearing tested in case I've got to wear a hearing aid. And that's kind of the things that people have to deal with. Women can wear They're hair long and they can hide their hearing aid. But guys, there are some stats saying that we're a little bit sorry. We're a bit backward in coming forward in getting our hearing tested, and it's things like that which, rightly so. If I don't have to hide anything as far as the fact that I might feel I've got a disability, but there's still a stigma around hearing loss. Okay, so just trying to tie in now some of the bits Russell was talking about. To me, it doesn't matter whether it's old or new technology, it's about benefiting the user. So there's a lot of marketing, a lot of stuff being done by the guys over at Bluetooth, and yet it's still some way off of providing the solution that they say they can do. So we need to work with them to try and guide them into making sure the message they send out is accurate. Because what it's meaning is there are people who want to access assistive listening systems now that can't because service providers aren't investing in equipment because they think there's something around the corner that's going to change overnight. Well, it's not. That's a fact. And I'm sure we've got some in questions that we can come up with some responses to some of the questions that will highlight that. It's interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I was out in Budapest at the ISCVE Congress and had the opportunity to speak with the Bluetooth guys on Auracast, and I did a little section about something similar to this, about assistive listening and some of the challenges. And it was interesting in, I think, having the guys from Bluetooth there experiencing the challenges that people have at an event like that, International Federation of Hard of Hearing. You'd expect to see a lot of people with a hearing loss. Well, guess what? There was. So a lot of the thought processes about how they were going to do this, people have mobile phones, they'll do this, they'll do that. Well, at the end of the day, people still wanted to have sound going directly into the hearing aid. They still wanted it to be done easily. They still wanted to have the benefits of how they work with the loop system. And that really, I think, changed some of the thinking about the Bluetooth guys out there. In fact, at that Congress, I don't know if anyone's seen it, but there was a declaration made about, from the ISCVE Congress itself, about the hearing aid manufacturers must keep the telecoils in the hearing aids for the foreseeable future. I don't know if you've seen that. It's on their website. I've got some copies of it if you need to have a look at that. But it's stuff like that where I think actually dealing with and seeing people have to use equipment and how they use it is help formulating how they think about presenting this new technology. So the more we can work together, I mean, it may come along and it might not work in the way we think it will work, or they think it's going to work. That's all got to be proven yet, and it's going to take time. They're not going to look at, for example, putting in Bluetooth in every application where a loop's used at the moment. I think Russell mentioned about banks and one-to-one loop systems. They're not even looking at that for 4 or 5 years down the line. They've got to prove what they are talking about now as a working solution. So this is interesting in that this messaging came from the hearing aid manufacturers, okay? So they've actually put together these bullet points to Bluetooth as what they want to see the messaging going forward. And that's quite a shift from where they were back in 2014 when I think I met them down at Gatwick Airport when they were first talking about this Bluetooth technology. Things like the user must remain in control. easy to switch off. It's all right going in, and how do you get into this technology? How do you get out of it? So it's quite powerful that they've actually taken the time to think about what they need from this new technology, if and when it comes along. So I've used that, one of those points there, and added some more things I feel we need to find out from this new technology, how it will work for the people who need to access assistive listening systems. What does it mean for the loop manufacturers? What does it mean for our industry? No one can seem to give a specific timeline. It's gonna maybe come out. Something might come out next year, and then something might come out a bit later. Transmitters, receivers, and as Russell was saying, then when does that one talk to that one, or we don't know. So trying to get a more accurate idea of that is what we need. It's still an unproven technology. In Budapest, I was given a demonstration of it, a managed demonstration, I must add, but it works. 12 of us in a room, but it was, I say, very, very managed. So I'm sure any technology, if it was done in a certain way, can demonstrate a benefit. And just going back to that point, service providers are reluctant to invest in current and proven technology. Loop systems is the current and proven technology. There are challenges around it, we know, but it's the one that we need to make sure people put in now and make sure it's installed, maintained and used correctly. So below the general messaging from, I would say, the Bluetooth guys, I'm looking to try and get them to be a bit more open, if you like, with some of this, what I'd call the stakeholders that are maybe a level below the general messaging. So these stakeholders, audiologists is such a key part of all of this. The National Health Service in the UK, we still get 80 to 85% of our hearing aids distributed through the NHS free. I think 90% of those hearing aids will come with a telecoil. How many are activated? I don't know. That's another challenge. Audiologists are being trained not necessarily about the benefits of telecoils and loop systems. And this has been going on for many years, the messaging that goes to those guys. So if through this work with Auracast, there's a message that comes out that talks about, to the audiologist, you need to be talking about your patients and providing equipment for assistive listening that works now, like telecoils, then that could help our industry. And that brings me to how will the new and existing technologies interact in the future? I don't know is the answer. I've got an idea, but I don't know because it's not out here yet. And that's one of the things I think is the challenges. But we know that loops are in the here and now. So yeah, I think that's about me. If that works. How do you want to do the questions?
Well, I thought we'd do for questions. Maybe if pull that off. That was class. Maybe if Russ and Peter would join Andrew at the front so we have a panel of the finest minds. Peter, please. And we can address questions to them, and I think we'll let them select between them who's the best person to respond. And I don't know how we take questions from. Oh.
Maybe you can ask him on the iPad for us.
Okay. So let's start off in the room to so we don't have to deal with the technology straight away. Plenty of interesting things to think about there. Please, someone must have a question they would like some more information on.
I'll ask a couple of questions. Telecoils in the hearing aids. Now they've been, as been quite rightly said, they've been around for a million years. Why haven't they been updated? Because it is just a piece of wire that's picking up the signal from a piece of wire that runs around the room. Why can't they use Wi-Fi to pick it up? And I know they do, so don't. But why can't, hearing aids and the technology
I need a technical one on that one.
of today, you can get Wi-Fi and everything in your pocket device. The hearing aid is obviously people walk around or in here. There's enough room in there to fit both of those devices, Bluetooth and so that could interact directly with the telecoil and pick up the signal.
I'm happy to talk to that if you like. Am I on?
You're on.
Good. Yeah, so, I mean, look. Okay, so why can't we do both telecoils and Wi-Fi in the hearing aid? I think there's a premium for space in hearing aids. First of all, I think there's a bit of a trade-off. A telecoil is a finite dimension. It has to be a certain size to get the level of performance that's achieved. A telecoil's there, a very, very low power system, essentially just like a microphone input, very, very low power system. But it just works on picking up audio frequency magnetic fields. It doesn't do anything complicated. There's no modulation. It's just essentially like picking up a signal from a speaker. I mean, that's what it was put in there for. So there's no real power overhead to that. If you want to put something in that's then going to take Wi-Fi, there's an extra bit of space you've got to put in there to support that. Receivers, antenna, all the rest of it. Plus, there's a power overhead that comes with Wi-Fi. And that's really why Wi-Fi has never been put in hearing aids, because you want a hearing aid to last more than an hour or two. You want to get through the day. And that's the benefit of Bluetooth Low Energy, is that actually it's capable of getting down to a usage case where that can be a reality. Whether hearing aid manufacturers will do dual fit, telecoil and Bluetooth Low Energy, I can't say. I'm not the hearing aid manufacturer, but it would be an option. But obviously everyone wants the smallest, the most discreet device to put in or behind their ears. So maybe that's the challenge. If there's a market for it, if people want that, then maybe they'll provide it. But I can't really speak for them what they're going to provide. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I
Okay.
don't agree with the real estate inside the hearing aid thing.
No, I think.
Because, that you've got enough room to fit a PCB board in there, and I think that's just my.
Okay, yeah. Question the real estate in the hearing aid. Yeah, well, I mean, I guess that's the trade-off they have to make.
They're trying to make them smaller and smaller. That's on. They're trying to make hearing aids smaller and smaller, and certainly some of the characteristics I think we've both listed, like broadcast, for instance. Once you get beyond a few users, if you have to make an individual communication with each one, then you're starting to overload your channel. Things like latency, any kind of Wi-Fi bearer has got considerable latency, and certainly things like the power issue. There's a lot of reasons as to why those sorts of products, which have been tried, haven't really made it, which is why Bluetooth is a really good example as to how, because that list I put up at the beginning of the number of things that the telecoils get right, this is where the Bluetooth idea actually ticks those boxes. And it's the ease of use, where you just walk in and switch and join in. That's where some of the challenges still have to be resolved.
Yeah, I mean, Bluetooth exists in the same frequency band. So in theory, it's the technology with the low energy as Auracast that could be able to fill that gap. It's the best candidate we've had to tick all those boxes. Good question.
John.
I'm interested about Auracast. And first of all, is there not a problem using 2.4? Is it? Sorry. Yep. I reckon it's testing on 2. Are we on? Do you not think there's an issue using 2.4 gig? I mean, you go to a crowded conference hall or a big church, and everyone turns their phones on, their iPads and things, and suddenly the whole Wi-Fi spectrum gets lost, gets swamped. So that's one part of the question. The other part of the question on Auracast is, I can't remember what you said, but what will the latency be on using Auracast? So there's two parts to the question there. The first one is...
Okay, so first one's coexistence then, really. I mean, I guess that's something that'll just have to be borne out a little bit by trying it, but as I said, with Bluetooth Low Energy and Auracast, it's a frequency hopping system. It will naturally find its way around everything else. I mean, how many Bluetooth devices are you going to need in a space? What people are going to be doing in a church with Bluetooth other than potentially listening to what's on offer? And as such, they will pick up the signal that's the channel that's advertised, the stream that's advertised, and they will listen to that. They're not transmitting anything, they're just receiving. So that's not going to clutter the channel in the use of that broadcast. Essentially, there is one transmitting system, or multiple if you've got, other languages and the like. So in theory, it should work really well. The question is, how is it going to coexist with Wi-Fi and all the other systems that are in place? But that's why it's an installation consideration. The other part of your question was? Latency. So yeah, I mean, in theory, that's one of the aspects that Bluetooth and the hearing aid manufacturers have looked into. They're convinced that they can do their end of the bargain, if you like, the hearing aid reception and reproduction to an audio content for an ear at such a low latency that actually it can get inside the 30 or 40 milliseconds that Peter was talking about. That's key. Such then, provided you deliver upstream with a similar low set of latency, the whole system can deliver within that sort of time frame. As I said, this low LC3 codec is one of the big factors of that. That's proven to do sensible latencies that can achieve this level of lip sync. So that's one of the big stepping stones that's got us to this point where that actually should be able to achieve the power, the latency, and so on and so forth, that allows us to be a real candidate for a replacement in the longer term.
Darryl.
Technologies like Auracast obviously rely on Bluetooth, which perfect for a small scale installation. Something like a Stadia with very long distances and distances between transmitters. How would you see something like Auracast work in that environment?
I think where you would see you distributing a normal Wi-Fi solution would be a similar kind of principle. You'd have transmitters dotted around various places. But any channels that you provide in a stadium or an airport, I think was one of the examples on the Auracast website. You might have a system whereby the same stream is transmitted from multiple channels, which is what I alluded to in, I think, in my talk about roaming, how one might be able to move between transmitters. So that audio will need distributing somehow, maybe over network, like Pete's maybe going to talk on a little bit later. And if that isn't time critical, then that's not such a big deal. We're not worried about a few milliseconds latency. It can be pushed around over a network, although we can do fast networks with Dante and the like. Received, transmitted, and it's all about the receivers then deciding which beacon to listen to, which one to choose. So there might be multiple channels, there might be a whole bunch of stuff to provide, but essentially a series of transmitters dotted around an installation, a large venue like that, with a decent length of coverage. I mean, it might take a few depending on the space and the dimensions you're trying to cover, but yeah, there's no reason why it can't do that. And obviously you could mount the transmitters higher up and increase the power levels and set them to a sensible level that you cover a kind of a bigger area. But it's all about having the right transmission antenna to deliver to the scenario that you're doing. So again, it's horses for courses. What device are you going to install that's going to solve that particular scenario? And that's where the products will come along in due course that can be able to do that kind of solution. Does that answer your question?
I think technically, I think to have a roaming situation on the network side of things, to build a situation where you've got a number of sort of effectively cells and you've got base stations, that's not difficult. What is actually the more challenging thing to actually overcome is that when you've got a receiver that's listening to one channel, if it's having to scan other channels and choose which is, then you've got more, it comes down to power again, actually, processing power and power, which we're trying to minimize in the hearing aid. So that's why this is still an area of work to do.
Yeah, and every device that's going to receive it has to deal with managing that. So your phone or your earbuds or a hearing aid has all got to deal with that conundrum about, I'm listening to this particular channel, but I'm seeing it advertised from two places. Which beacon do I listen to? How do I move between the two? If this is the one that I'm closest to, but I turn my back on it, how does that affect it? Does it decide to go to that one? And how are the transitions between that audio managed such that it doesn't cause a horrible glitch, or worse? So we'll get there.
I've got a couple of questions from outside the room, so I'd like to give those a shot. Firstly, Doug Edworthy has asked, are we planning to talk about the need for the overarching ALS standard and how this is going to be done?
I could talk a bit more about that if you like. Yeah, I mean, ultimately we said there's various technologies like Wi-Fi and other things that haven't really got a standard to reference it to. So I guess the point is that we should really, for a assistive listening system, have a hierarchy where we've got a reference point at the top. Doesn't matter what kind of technology you use, that then can be referred to by all the other standards and say, whichever technology you use, these are the key requirements that are important. That might fall back to maintenance and service revision and all the rest of it, all the things that are key to ensure that whatever system you install will deliver that. And I think that's really what that's getting at. I think Peter Mapp and I are trying to piece something together, and we're putting that with a proposal to one of the technical committees to try and make that something that's a reality. So hopefully that'll bear a little bit more fruit in due course, and it might be something that's on the menu in, San Francisco for one of those the meetings that are going on with the IEC at the moment. If that answers Doug's question.
I hope so. Thank you. This is, I'm afraid I haven't brought my... Andrew Grossman has asked the question. Being that it is agreed that Auracast is still at least 5 years down the line, if not more, why is the push not to get hearing associations and charities to push for more maintenance and policing of existing loop systems? The UK alone probably has hundreds of thousands of loops installed. An annual testing requirement like PAT testing would make a huge difference to the existing infrastructure.
There are lots and lots of loop systems installed in the UK alone. I think that this, in an ideal world, that's what we should be working towards. I think there is an issue with the charities. If I'm honest, you look at the people like Hearing Link that used to be very active. They've now merged with, I think, Hearing Dogs. The RNID have shrunk considerably. They went through the process of being RNID, action on hearing loss, then back to the RNID. They've shed a load of staff, so it's not straightforward as just working with the charities. There's been a lot of work over the years trying to work with charities. I can personally vouch for that. It's a big challenge. So, and it will need funding. The answer is, Andrew, yeah, it's something that we as the industry should be focusing on and trying to do. There is a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes trying to make that happen, but it's a big piece of work. Anything to add?
I think it's interesting to know what also people's perception is of loops, and I think we did lose the battle a while ago. We've done some work with Sense. It was actually through Ros that they contacted the institute, and we actually went and sat down with them, and they had an international conference, and they wanted infrared systems, and we said why, and they said because loops don't work. And we actually put in 10 loops with low spill because it was a conference room, so we had 5 rooms that all joined to one, and then they split up, and so we had 5 different systems. And come the morning break, we went round and we spoke to quite a lot of the delegates. There's this international delegates who were hard of hearing, and they'd come to a conference, so they knew what they were talking about. And in the morning break, we asked a lot of people, what do you think of the loop systems? And they said, we haven't tried them because they don't work. And we said, just please, could you? So lunchtime, we didn't go to them. They were all rushing up to us saying, it's amazing. And that is actually the perception that we have now got into, is that a lot of these charities have already kind of, in some ways, we've already lost the battle, so we're on the back foot with this, because if that's their perception, they've already given up with loops.
Still, I've got a couple more questions here, but I think we've got like 3 more minutes in order to give us a little bit of time between things. So does anyone have something particularly pressing from the room?
Two things. One of which is, what you said is these charities. Is there a group of effectively secret shoppers that we as installers and maintainers can tap into to get the users to certify that actually it works in this space? And actually, you mentioned this Google Maps process. Is there, can we get a star rating, you know, on my venue, your venue, that actually you've achieved, you know, the secret shoppers could walk in and do that. And then kind of my other little thing is, you know, we are a team of sound engineers. In my opinion, I don't think it sounds that great in here right now. You know, we've got phasing going on, we've got, you know, we're on the cusp of feedback with stuff, and actually in this space, if that's what we're doing with a live sound experience, how can, you know, we should be doing it better than that into a hearing aid system, should we not?
Well, firstly, if you go to the ILHEMA website, there is a section of that has got like a rate and review section to it that we've had for 2 years now, and it's been part of a charity before. And if I'm honest, it's not been used that well. So the Google Maps thing is something that we're going to try and pick up on, but it needs ultimately needs individuals to get on there, and you know, local deaf groups or hard of hearing groups that are in an area. We need to get them activated, but we've tried. I've tried it and been involved with it for many years, and it's tough. You know, it's not something that you can just send an email out and then suddenly you find you're swamped with people trying to get rate and review on the local loop systems. So what you're saying is yeah, I get it. We have tried it and we'll keep trying, but it's not. At times it feels like we're, you know, just kind of flogging a dead horse trying to get something to happen. Sorry, and your other question was about the audio in. Yeah.
You know, my personal opinion, it's part of my doing it, and if this is what would be feeding to an induction loop, we've got the first principle wrong of getting the right microphone in the right space and the right food chain.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I was saying, these guys need all the help they can get, and it was difficult for us to hear, and that's why actually quite a lot of loops that have been installed are just not actually getting used. And it's all very, and every word we've said about Bluetooth, if you're in an environment where you need a microphone, everything I said still applies. So we have to get it right. And whether we need kind of more regulation around who puts these in, because what's happening is that people are taking good money to put in systems that are not properly commissioned.
Yeah, the old message of garbage in, garbage out when it comes to audio comes to fruition. But yeah, look, it would be a real shame if it took the advent of a kind of a mass system like Auracast to kind of force us to create a system that delivers. You know, when everyone has the ability to listen to something in their pocket, it's a shame that it takes the groundswell of opinion and access to force the people that actually really need it to get the service they need.
So, in summary, there's a question here about, given that Bluetooth radio mics drop in and out and cease transmission in congested environments, will Auracast be able to guarantee continuity? But I'm not actually going to ask that question because I'd like to sort of just wrap this up with, given that there are obviously so many concerns about that, if you had to summarise in one sentence where you think the ALS solution of, say, 2032, is it unequivocally Auracast, or you know? And if, like I say, if we can kind of wrap it up in maybe a sentence or so each.
Crystal ball is what you're asking.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Well, I mean, notwithstanding the challenges that we've just mentioned about actually making them work, I mean, I don't see why not, but it needs to deliver on what it's offering. There's still a lot of work to do, but yeah, I don't see why not. 10 years, it couldn't be the reference point, but
Andrew? Do you agree?
In 10 years' time, I think it's still all about coexistence with what's here now and
Still going to be loops, yeah.
what's coming along. So it's all about coexistence for me.
Peter, last word.
Half the problems that we saw were poor microphone technique and half were poor magnetic fields. And the Bluetooth hopefully could solve a lot of the magnetic field issues. And then we've got maintenance. So, yeah, it stands a good chance.
There's a period of transition that's going to be needed to navigate.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. So we'll take a short break, and the next debate will begin at 1:45 in 7 minutes.